All that Mount Moriah means to Abraham in terms of agony and heartache and pain, magnify that 1,000-fold, and we haven't even begun to see yet what Calvary meant to God the Father. As we watch Isaac make his way up Mount Moriah, what we really ought to be seeing in our heart is Jesus walking up those parallel steps to the slopes of Calvary. You notice in verse number 3 at the very end of that verse, it says they went unto the place. In verse number 4, Abraham saw the place afar off. In verse number 9, and they came to the place. I mean, how that place must have haunted Abraham's dreams. 4 days of contemplation. 4 days from the moment he was asked to the time he arrives at the intended destination. Every day he had to think about what was going to happen. Abraham would have been contemplating every moment that he had had with his child. I mean, he can't even refer to Mount Moriah as Mount Moriah. He just over and over here calls it the place. And I read that and I wonder, how must God have felt knowing that his son was a lamb slain from the foundation of the world? The Bible says in Luke 23, verse 33, and when they were come to that place, which is called Calvary, there they crucified him and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. The one place foreshadowed the other place. Come to verse number 5 in our text in Genesis 22, and notice it says, Abraham said to his young men, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come to you. And as we look at this dress rehearsal for Calvary, it says in verse 6, Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, he laid it upon Isaac his son, he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. They're going to take this journey alone, father and son. Mark chapter 14, verse 33 through 35, and we think of Jesus going to the Garden of Gethsemane. He takes Peter, James, and John and began to be sore amazed and very heavy. And he said unto them, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. And then he tells them to tarry ye here and watch. And he takes the journey alone. We think in this instance, the father, Abraham, had the instruments of sacrifice. The son, Isaac, had the wood laid on his back. And again, we see a picture of Christ with the cross on his shoulders, heading toward Mount Calvary. In verse 7 and 8, and Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here am I, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. So they're going to take this journey together, and we think of, say, go both together, the repetition of the phrase. They went together. They went together. Isaac, I believe, knew exactly what was going on. He had been here in this place before with his dad, and this time there's no lamb. But he willingly submitted to the Father's will. And what I want you to sense today, and what I want you to try to grasp as much as our minds will allow us to. Can we not begin to feel what Abraham felt? Can we not enter into the anguish that rent his soul? Can we not understand how much he shrank from the deed ahead? Can you not just imagine him catching glimpses of his son as they continued this journey? Maybe your child thinking about their life. Can you hear him cry out with David, my son, my son. My son Isaac, would to God I could have died in your place, my son. Can't you begin to feel what God would have felt as his only begotten son makes his way toward Golgotha? In verse 9, they come to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar of the wood. So here are the father and the son. They're ascending to the summit of the mount. The altar is erected. The wood is piled in order. Isaac is placed on the altar, and with deliberate care, each act is carried out. And I try to imagine the scene, as best as I can in my mind. And I tried to wonder what kind of faith it would have taken Abraham to raise that knife in that last act of obedience to slay his son, because in his heart and his mind, he had already done it. And so maybe he's beginning to think back. I mean, normally this happens with a lamb, and he would look back to that very first lamb that he ever offered, that loving, tender little lamb. And as Abraham took a knife and slit that lamb's throat, the first time he probably felt like a murderer. And now his son? And what about his wife? I mean, 4 days earlier when Abraham left home, he couldn't have said, Sarah, I'm going to go offer Isaac on the mountain and I'll be back in about 4 days. I mean, he couldn't share that with her. And if Abraham had carried through with this act, which in his heart he intended to do, could their marriage ever have recovered? Would Sarah ever have been able to forgive him? And then I think of the whole act of trying to think, I'm going to lay my son down and I'm going to give him. I mean, who can measure the faith that it took for Abraham to say, God, I'm willing to do this? And as you consider it, I just want you to understand that this is a preview of Calvary. This is a preview of what God willingly will lay down for us, willingly giving his life. And I know that you know this story, and it makes it a little more difficult for us today, but we know in the end the knife was stayed. Abraham passed the ultimate test. A substitute ram was caught in the thicket. We know that if Isaac had perished, all of Israel would have perished with him, and our hope for today would have as well. I mean, he was the promised child. He would survive another day and bear seed, the seed that led to the Messiah.